Welcome to Story Speak English, where every story makes your English stronger, and every mystery keeps you listening until the very end. Tonight's story begins with a question. What would you do if you walked into an abandoned government building and discovered a staircase that officially does not exist? Not tomorrow, not years ago, tonight. A security guard thought he was starting an ordinary night shift. He carried a flashlight, a radio, and a simple checklist. He believed every strange sound had a logical explanation. But before sunrise, he would find footprints that appeared from nowhere. An elevator that stopped on a floor that didn't exist. And a hidden archive where people were never meant to leave. This is not a story about monsters hiding in the dark. It is a story about memory, fear, and the terrifying things people choose to forget. As you listen, pay close attention to the vocabulary, pronunciation, and expressions. At the end of this video, you'll take a 5-question English listening quiz to see how much you understood. Can you score 5 out of 5? Keep your score honestly. And here's one warning before we begin. If you ever discover a staircase that wasn't there yesterday, don't climb it. Take a deep breath. Turn down the lights. Put on your headphones. And let's begin. 2 months after a forgotten government building was scheduled for demolition, a night security guard entered to perform one final inspection and discovered that the building had quietly gained an extra floor that did not exist on any blueprint. By sunrise, every camera would show him walking inside, but none would show him coming back out. If you ever find a staircase that wasn't there yesterday, never climb it. Rain hammered against the windshield as Daniel Mercer parked outside the old Ashcroft Municipal Records building. The structure stood alone, at the edge of the city like a giant block of forgotten concrete. Its windows were black. Its walls were stained with decades of rain, dust, and neglect. Every floor looked empty. Yet something about the building felt awake. Daniel checked the clock on his dashboard. 11:47 p.m. His assignment was simple. One final overnight inspection before demolition crews arrived the next morning. He had worked security for nearly 12 years. Factories, hospitals, abandoned schools. He did not believe in ghosts. He believed in broken pipes, old wiring, rats in the walls, and frightened imaginations. That confidence stayed with him until the moment he stepped through the front entrance. The heavy glass doors groaned shut behind him. The sound echoed far longer than it should have. Silence followed. Not ordinary silence. A thick, unnatural silence that seemed to swallow every small sound. Even his breathing felt muted. The lobby smelled of cold concrete, old paper, and something else. Something damp. Not the fresh smell of rain. The stale odor of walls that had trapped moisture for decades. His flashlight swept across the room. Dust floated slowly through the beam like tiny white insects. An enormous grandfather clock stood against one wall. Its hands pointed to exactly to 17. Neither hand moved. A reception desk stretched across the center of the lobby. No computers. No paperwork. No family photographs. No coffee cups. Nothing personal remained. It looked less like an abandoned office and more like someone had carefully erased every trace that people had ever worked there. Daniel clicked on his body camera. A small green light blinked. "Final inspection," he said calmly into the microphone. "Beginning at 11:49 p.m. His own voice sounded strangely distant, as if the building had absorbed it. He walked toward the elevators. Halfway across the marble floor, he stopped. There were wet footprints ahead of him. Bare human footprints. Perfectly clear. Dark with fresh water. They began in the middle of the lobby. Not at the entrance. Not near a broken window. Simply appearing from nowhere. One after another. Leading toward the elevator doors. Daniel stared. His flashlight followed them. There were no returning footprints. Only one silent trail. As if someone or something had walked out of empty air and was waiting upstairs. Daniel remained frozen for several seconds. The rain outside had disappeared beneath the crushing silence of the building. He slowly crouched beside the footprints. They were unmistakably real. Each toe was sharply defined. Tiny beads of water still shimmered inside the impressions, catching the pale beam of his flashlight. They had been made only moments ago. He reached out with one gloved finger. The marble was cold. The water was colder. A chill spread through his hand so quickly that he instinctively pulled it back. "Someone's inside," he whispered. The words sounded reasonable, comforting, even. An intruder. A homeless person. A prank. Anything but the thought that had quietly begun growing in the back of his mind. He stood and followed the trail. Each step echoed softly. The footprints led directly to the old brass elevator doors. Daniel pressed the call button. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. Silence. A faded inspection sticker beside the panel revealed the elevators had been disconnected almost a year earlier. Out of service. He sighed and turned toward the emergency stairwell. Its heavy steel door stood only 20 feet away. As he reached for the handle, ding. The sound was bright, clean, impossible. Daniel froze. Slowly, very slowly, he turned around. The elevator indicator above the doors glowed with a weak amber light. The number changed. 1, then 2, 3. The building only had 6 floors. The numbers continued climbing. 4, 5, 6. The motor hummed somewhere deep inside the shaft. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. The elevator should have stopped. Instead, the display flickered. A number appeared that made no sense. 7. The old building plans had listed only 6 floors. There had never been a 7th. The humming stopped. Complete silence returned. Then the elevator bell chimed once more. The brass doors slid open with painful slowness. Inside, the elevator was empty. No lights, no control panel, no buttons, only darkness. Not ordinary darkness. It looked dense, almost solid, as though the small metal cabin contained a room much larger than the elevator itself. Daniel aimed his flashlight inside. The beam traveled several feet and vanished. It was swallowed whole. No back wall reflected the light. No floor. No ceiling. Only endless blackness. His body camera suddenly crackled with static. A distorted voice whispered through the speaker clipped to his shoulder. Not loud. Barely audible. Yet every word was perfectly clear. You're late. Daniel jerked backward, nearly dropping his flashlight. He grabbed the radio on his belt. Control, this is Mercer. Do you copy? Only static answered. Then another whisper emerged. This one sounded closer. Not from the radio. Not from the elevator. From somewhere directly behind him. Soft. Patient. Close enough that he could almost feel warm breath against the back of his neck. Don't make us wait any longer. Daniel slowly began to turn. And what he saw standing in the empty lobby made. The flashlight slipped from his trembling hand. The flashlight struck the marble floor. It rolled in a slow circle. Its beam swept across the empty lobby. Reception desk. Grandfather clock. Elevator. Nothing. Daniel's breathing became fast and uneven. He could have sworn someone had been standing behind him. Close enough to touch. Close enough to whisper into his ear. He bent down, picked up the flashlight, and forced himself to breathe slowly. You imagined it, he said aloud. His voice sounded weak. The building answered with silence. Then, tap. A single footstep echoed somewhere above him. Daniel looked toward the ceiling. Another step followed. Tap. Then another. Tap, tap, tap. Someone was walking upstairs. Not running. Not hiding. Walking with calm, measured confidence. He aimed his flashlight toward the stairwell door. The footsteps stopped. His radio hissed. For a moment, he thought someone was finally responding. Instead, a woman's voice drifted through the static. Quiet. Emotionless. Ashcroft Records Department. A pause. Please remain where you are. Another pause. Your number will be called shortly. The transmission ended. Daniel frowned. The building had been abandoned for years. Who could possibly be making office announcements in the middle of the night? His body camera emitted a soft electronic beep. Low battery. Daniel stared at it in disbelief. He had fully charged it less than an hour ago. The battery icon blinked red. 20%. Then 12. 7. 3. The screen went black. Dead. His flashlight dimmed. Not much. Just enough for him to notice. The beam that had once reached the far wall now faded after only a few meters. The shadows seemed thicker, closer, hungry. Daniel swallowed hard. He took one careful step toward the stairwell. The wet footprints were still there, except they had changed. Before, they had led only toward the elevator. Now there was a second trail, fresh, still glistening. These footprints emerged from the darkness inside the open elevator. They crossed the marble floor and stopped less than a foot behind where Daniel had been standing. He slowly compared them. One trail went into the elevator. The other came out. Someone had exited while his back was turned. But there had been no sound, no movement, no reflection, no breathing, only silence. A terrible realization settled over him. He was no longer searching an empty building. He was sharing it. Something shifted at the far end of the lobby, just beyond the edge of the flashlight's reach. A shape, tall, perfectly still. Its outline was almost human, but unnaturally thin, as though it had been stretched far beyond normal proportions. Daniel couldn't see its face, only the pale eyes, watching, unblinking. Neither of them moved. Nearly 30 seconds passed. Then, with impossible slowness, the figure lifted one impossibly long arm and pointed toward the stairwell door, not as a warning, as an invitation. At that exact moment, the grandfather clock, silent for decades, gave a single deafening chime. And somewhere high above, from a floor that officially did not exist, someone screamed. The scream lasted only 3 seconds, but Daniel would remember it for the rest of his life. It was not loud. It was worse than loud. It carried the raw sound of absolute terror, the desperate cry of someone who had finally seen something the human mind could not accept. Then it stopped. Not slowly, not naturally. It ended in the middle of a breath, as though the person had simply ceased to exist. The silence that followed felt heavier than concrete. Daniel stood motionless, his heart pounding so hard that he could hear blood rushing through his ears. The tall figure at the end of the lobby was gone. No footsteps, no fading shadow, no opening door. It had vanished between one heartbeat and the next. His flashlight flickered. Once, twice. The beam shrank again. The edges of the lobby dissolved into darkness. He forced himself toward the stairwell. Every instinct screamed at him to leave the building. Run. Push through the front doors. Drive away. Never come back. Yet another feeling pulled at him with equal force. Curiosity. A dangerous, irresistible curiosity. Who had screamed? And from where? He gripped the cold steel handle. It resisted for a moment before opening with a long, aching groan. The stairwell smelled different from the lobby. The air was colder, stale, heavy with the scent of rust, damp concrete, and something faintly metallic. Blood, or perhaps old iron. His flashlight climbed the walls. Gray paint peeled away in long strips. Emergency exit signs hung crooked. Dust covered every step, except for one narrow path. Someone had walked here recently. The dust had been disturbed by countless bare footprints leading upward. Not one person. Many. Dozens of overlapping prints. Small feet. Large feet. Children. Adults. All climbing. None descending. Daniel swallowed. He began to climb. Each step echoed upward into darkness. First floor. Second. Third. The building seemed ordinary again. Empty offices. Broken doors. Stacks of forgotten filing cabinets. Fourth floor. Nothing. Fifth. Silence. Sixth. He stopped. The staircase should have ended here. According to every map, every blueprint, and every inspection report, there was only a rooftop access door above him. Instead, another flight of stairs continued upward. Fresh concrete. Clean metal railings. No dust. No signs of age. As if someone had built an entirely new level yesterday. At the top hung a single black door. No room number. No exit sign. No handle. Only a small brass plaque. Daniel aimed his trembling flashlight at it. 3 words had been engraved into the metal. Archive Level 7. His mouth went dry. Level 7 did not exist. It never had. He stepped closer. The plaque was warm. Everything else in the stairwell was icy cold. Then he heard it. Not from behind the door. Not above him. From the other side of the stairwell. Below. Slow footsteps. One after another. Coming steadily upward from the 6th floor. Someone was climbing toward him. Slowly. Patiently. Without hesitation. Daniel leaned over the railing and pointed. His flashlight down the center of the stairwell. At first, he saw nothing. Only flights of stairs spiraling into darkness. Then, a face looked up at him. It was his own. Every feature was identical. The same eyes. The same hair. The same security uniform. But the thing below smiled with a grin far too wide for any human face. And without making a sound, it began climbing faster. Daniel stumbled backward so violently that his shoulder struck the wall. Pain shot through his arm. He barely noticed. The thing below was climbing. Not walking. Not running. Climbing with long, smooth movements that did not match the rhythm of human joints. Its hands gripped the railing. Its feet touched each step with perfect precision. Its smile never changed. Daniel raised his flashlight again. The beam landed on the creature's face. Empty. The smile was still there, but its eyes reflected no light at all. They were two deep, black hollows. He blinked. The staircase was empty. No footsteps. No figure. Nothing. His own breathing echoed through the concrete shaft. For a moment, he wondered if exhaustion had finally broken his mind. Then he heard it. A quiet chuckle. Behind him. Daniel spun around. The black door marked Archive Level 7 stood exactly where it had been. But it was no longer closed. A narrow gap had appeared. No more than 2 inches. Cold air drifted through it. It smelled ancient, like paper left untouched for 100 years. Like mildew, like wet stone buried beneath the earth. And beneath those smells, there was something sweeter, faint, unpleasantly familiar. The scent of old perfume. Someone was inside, watching, waiting. The gap widened another inch. No hand touched it. The door simply opened on its own, very slowly, without a single creak. Daniel told himself to leave, turn around, go back down. Forget the scream. Forget the footprints. Forget this impossible place. Instead, he stepped closer. His flashlight slipped through the opening. Rows of towering filing shelves stretched into darkness. Thousands upon thousands of gray archive boxes. Perfectly arranged. Perfectly still. The room seemed impossibly large. Far larger than the building itself. The ceiling disappeared into shadow. The shelves continued farther than the flashlight could reach. Daniel whispered to himself, "This isn't possible." His voice vanished into the darkness. No echo returned. He crossed the threshold. The instant both feet entered the room, the door slammed shut behind him. The crash thundered through the endless archive. Daniel lunged for the handle. There wasn't one. Only smooth black metal. He pounded on the door. Nothing. He shouted for help. His own voice sounded strangely distant, swallowed by the endless rows of files. Then, a soft click echoed somewhere nearby. One archive box slid out from a shelf by itself. Only a few inches. Daniel stared. Another box slid open. Then another. Then another. One after another. Dozens of gray boxes slowly pulled themselves from the shelves, as if invisible hands were searching through them. Sheets of yellowed paper drifted gently onto the floor. Daniel picked up the nearest page. At the top was an official government heading, Missing Person Record. Below it was a photograph, black and white, old. The face belonged to a young woman. Across the page, in thick red letters, someone had stamped one word: returned. Confused, Daniel grabbed another file. Another missing person. Another photograph. Another red stamp. Returned. His pulse quickened. He reached for a third file. Then a fourth. Every photograph showed a different missing person. Every page carried the same crimson mark. Returned. Then his hand froze. One folder lay open at the very end of the shelf. Unlike the others, it was brand new. The paper was clean. The ink was fresh. At the top, beneath the words Missing Person Record, was a color photograph taken only hours earlier. It showed Daniel standing outside the Ashcroft Municipal Records building, looking directly into the camera. Beneath the photograph, the status line was still blank. As he stared at it in horror, something invisible picked up a red rubber stamp. He heard the ink pad press down. Thump. The stamp began to descend toward the empty space on the page. The red stamp hovered above the paper. Daniel stared, unable to move. There was no hand, no arm. Only the stamp itself, suspended in the air as though held by something invisible. For one endless second, everything remained perfectly still. Then, thump. The stamp struck the page. Daniel flinched. A cloud of crimson ink spread across the document. His heart pounded as he looked down. The blank space was no longer blank. A single word bled across the page in dark red letters. Pending. A cold wave of relief washed over him. Not returned. Not yet. His relief lasted only a moment. A dry voice echoed through the endless shelves. So, you're still deciding? The words came from everywhere. Every aisle, every shadow, every inch of darkness. Daniel swung his flashlight wildly. Nothing. Only silent rows of archive boxes disappearing into blackness. Who's there? He shouted. No answer. Instead, another sound drifted through the room. Paper. Thousands of sheets of paper rustling at once. Not from air. There was no breeze. The pages moved as though every file in the archive had been opened simultaneously. The whispering grew louder. At first it sounded meaningless. Random noises. Then the sound slowly became words. Hundreds of voices. Men, women, children, all speaking at once. Not screaming, not crying, simply repeating the same sentence. Over and over and over. We signed because we looked. Daniel's skin prickled. He backed away from the files. His heel struck something. A desk. It had not been there before. An old wooden clerk's desk stood alone in the center of the aisle. A brass lamp glowed softly on its surface, casting a warm pool of light that felt strangely out of place in the endless darkness. Everything on the desk was neatly arranged. An open ledger, a fountain pen, a small bottle of black ink, and a single sheet of paper waiting in the center. Daniel stepped closer despite himself. At the top of the page, elegant handwriting read, "Visitor registration." Below it were hundreds of signatures, different names, different styles of handwriting, some careful, some hurried, some little more than trembling scratches. The final line was empty, waiting. Beside it, in fresh black ink, someone had already written his name. Daniel Mercer. He had never touched the pen. He had never written on the page. Yet there it was, perfectly formed, as though the book had always expected him. The fountain pen rolled across the desk by itself. It stopped beside the empty signature line, waiting. The whispering voices fell silent. Absolute silence. Daniel reached toward the pen, then stopped. Something caught his eye. A framed photograph sat at the far corner of the desk, facing away from him. Slowly, he turned it around. His stomach dropped. The photograph showed the same desk, the same ledger, the same lamp, but the man sitting in the chair was older. His hair had turned gray. His face was thin and exhausted. He wore the same security uniform, the same name badge, Daniel Mercer. He was staring directly into the camera with hollow, defeated eyes. Beneath the photograph, engraved on a tarnished brass plate, were 6 chilling words. Into the juste 14,99. Daniel whispered, "That's impossible." A voice answered from directly behind his shoulder. Calm, polite, almost welcoming. No. A slow breath brushed the back of his neck. It simply hasn't happened yet. Daniel spun around. The flashlight beam sliced through the darkness. Nothing. No one stood behind him. Yet the air still carried the faint warmth of someone's breath. The old perfume returned. Soft, sweet, decades out of date. It lingered just long enough to make his stomach tighten. The brass lamp on the desk flickered. Once, twice. Then it steadied again. The endless rows of shelves seemed different now. Closer. Daniel was certain there had been several. Feet of open space between them only moments before. Now the aisles felt narrow, confined, as if the archive itself had quietly drawn nearer while he wasn't looking. He backed away from the registration desk. The whispering had stopped completely. That frightened him more than the voices. Silence meant something was listening. He forced himself to think logically. There has to be another exit. He turned into the nearest aisle. Shelf after shelf towered above him. Every gray archive box carried a small white label. Names. Thousands of names. Each one carefully typed. He swept his flashlight across them. Some labels were faded with age. Others looked brand new. One name caught his eye. Evelyn Ross, the missing woman from the first file. He pulled the box from the shelf. Inside lay a leather wallet, a wristwatch, a pair of glasses, a faded photograph of a smiling family. Personal belongings, carefully preserved, as though someone had catalogued every piece of a vanished life. He placed the box back. Another label. Thomas Weaver. Another. Luis Ortega. Another. Every name belonged to someone reported missing. Every box contained the small remains of an ordinary life. A child's toy. A wedding ring. A notebook. A train ticket. A house key. The archive was not storing documents. It was storing people, or what was left of them. Daniel's breathing became shallow. He hurried down the aisle. The shelves continued endlessly. No windows. No walls. No sign of the door through which he had entered. Only more aisles. More boxes. More names. Then he stopped. One shelf stood completely empty, except for a single gray archive box placed neatly in its center. Its white label had no dust. The ink looked fresh. Daniel lifted his flashlight. The label read, Mercer Daniel. His fingers trembled. No. He reached out despite every instinct warning him not to. The lid was already loose. It opened with almost no effort. Inside, there were only 3 objects. His security badge, his flashlight, and the wedding band he had worn for 11 years. The ring he was wearing right now. Daniel looked down at his left hand. The gold band was still there. He looked back into the box. Another identical ring rested inside. Every tiny scratch was the same. Every mark. Every dent. It was impossible. A sudden metallic click echoed somewhere behind him. Then another. Then dozens more. He turned. One by one. Every archive box along the towering shelves had begun to open. Their lids rose in perfect unison. Slowly. Patiently. As if thousands of unseen eyes were opening at exactly the same moment. From deep inside the darkness beyond the shelves came the sound of footsteps. Not one person. Not 2. Hundreds. Walking together. Without hurry. Without hesitation. Coming toward him. And above the steady rhythm of those approaching feet, a child's quiet voice asked the question no one should ever hear in an empty room. Are you here to replace him? Daniel's throat tightened. The child's voice had come from somewhere ahead of him. Small, gentle, almost innocent. Yet every word carried the weight of something ancient. He lifted his flashlight. The beam trembled across the endless aisle. At first, he saw only rows of open archive boxes. Then, a little girl stepped into the light. She couldn't have been older than 8. She wore a pale blue dress that looked decades out of fashion. Her dark hair fell neatly to her shoulders. She held a stuffed rabbit beneath one arm. Its button eyes were missing. Its white fur had turned gray with age. She looked perfectly ordinary. That was the worst part. There was no blood, no twisted limbs, no monstrous smile. Only a frightened child standing alone in an impossible place. Daniel knelt slowly. Hey. His voice was barely above a whisper. My name is Daniel. The girl tilted her head. I know. Her answer came too quickly. You've been expected. A cold shiver crawled across his back. What's your name? He asked. She looked down at the rabbit. For several long seconds, she said nothing. Then she frowned. I don't remember. Her voice cracked. They took my name away. Daniel's heart sank. Who did? The little girl slowly raised one finger. She pointed past him, toward the registration desk. Daniel turned. The desk was no longer empty. Someone sat in the old wooden chair. A man, thin, gray-haired. His back faced Daniel. He wore a faded security uniform. The fabric was old, but the shoulder patch was unmistakable. Ashcroft's Security. The man was writing steadily in the enormous ledger. Scratch, scratch, scratch. His fountain pen never paused, never lifted. Just line after line after line. Daniel took one careful step forward. The chair creaked. The man stopped writing. Without turning around, he spoke in a tired voice. I wondered how long it would take before they sent another one. Daniel froze. The voice. It was older, rougher, but unmistakably his own. The old man slowly stood. His movements were stiff, as though every joint had forgotten how to bend. He turned. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. It was him, not merely someone who looked similar. Every scar, every wrinkle, every feature, only aged by decades of hopelessness. His eyes were sunken. His uniform hung loosely over a thin body. Black ink stained his fingertips. The older Daniel smiled sadly. I tried to leave, he said. I really did. He looked toward the endless shelves. They always choose someone practical. Someone who believes every mystery has an explanation. His smile faded. I believed that too. The little girl quietly backed away into the darkness. Daniel barely noticed. He couldn't look away from the man standing before him. I don't understand, he whispered. The older Daniel nodded. I know. I said those exact words. He slowly closed the ledger. The heavy cover slammed shut with a deep, echoing thud. Instantly, every open archive box across the endless room snapped closed. The footsteps stopped. The whispers vanished. The archive became perfectly still. The older Daniel looked directly into his younger self's eyes. Then, with quiet urgency, he said, "They're listening now." A low rumble rolled through the floor. The shelves began to shake. Dust drifted down from the unseen ceiling. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the last row of files, something enormous took a single step. The entire archive trembled beneath its weight, and the older Daniel whispered the words that filled the room with absolute dread. "Don't let it see your face." Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. "Don't let it see my face," he whispered. The older Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his shirt pocket and removed a small square of cracked glass. A broken mirror. Its edges were blackened with age. He held it out. "Take this." The younger Daniel hesitated. "What is it?" "A mistake," the older man replied quietly. "And the only reason I'm still alive." The floor shuddered again. This time the vibration was stronger. Somewhere beyond the endless shelves, something impossibly heavy dragged itself across the concrete. Not footsteps. A slow, scraping movement, like stone being pulled over stone. The sound echoed through every aisle. The older Daniel lowered his voice. "It doesn't hunt the way animals do. It doesn't follow sound. It doesn't follow movement." His hollow eyes met Daniel's. "It follows recognition." Daniel frowned. "I don't understand." "You will." The scraping stopped. Absolute silence returned. Then every brass lamp in the archive went out at once. Darkness swallowed the room. Only Daniel's flashlight remained. Its weak beam shook in his trembling hand. The older Daniel hissed through clenched teeth. "Turn it off." Daniel stared. "What?" "Now." His thumb found the switch. The light vanished. The darkness was complete. It wasn't merely the absence of light. It felt alive, heavy, pressing against his skin. He could hear his own heartbeat. He could hear the slow breathing of the older Daniel. And somewhere very close, he heard another breath. Deep, patient, not human. Daniel froze. It was standing nearby, far closer than he had imagined. He strained to listen. The breathing circled them, never hurried, never stopping, as though something immense was walking around them in slow, deliberate circles. Then a voice emerged from the darkness. It was warm, gentle, the voice of Daniel's late mother. Daniel. His heart lurched. No, she had died 5 years ago. Daniel. The voice sounded exactly as he remembered. Soft, loving, I've been looking for you." His eyes filled with tears before he could stop them. Every memory rushed back. Her smile, her laugh, the way she used to call his name from the kitchen. The older Daniel whispered sharply, "Don't answer." The darkness breathed. Then another familiar voice called out. His wife. "Daniel, I'm scared. Please, come find me." His chest tightened. It sounded so real. He took an involuntary step forward. A hand gripped his wrist. The older Daniel. His fingers were ice cold. "It knows every face you've ever loved," he whispered. "It borrows them. It waits for you to look." Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. The voices multiplied. His father, an old friend, his first school teacher, neighbors, co-workers, each one calling gently, each one sounding completely real. Then, the voices stopped. A single sound replaced them. A child quietly counting. 1. A pause. 2. The older Daniel's grip tightened painfully. His voice cracked for the first time. "Oh no," Daniel whispered. "What is it?" The answer came as the counting continued. 3. The older Daniel leaned close enough for Daniel to feel his breath. It has started looking back. Somewhere in the darkness, two enormous eyes slowly opened. The eyes did not glow. They did not shine. They simply existed. Two vast circles, darker than the darkness around them, hanging impossibly high in the air. Daniel could not judge their distance. They seemed 100 feet away, then 10, then directly in front of him. The longer he looked, the less certain he became of where they were. His breathing slowed, not because he was calming down, because something inside him was forgetting how to breathe. The child's voice continued. The older Daniel covered the broken mirror with his hand. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "don't look at it directly." "But I already am." "No." The older man swallowed. "You think you are." Daniel frowned. The words made no sense. Then the impossible happened. The enormous eyes blinked. Not together. One, then the other. And with each blink, the archive changed. A shelf disappeared. Another appeared somewhere else. The registration desk slid silently across the floor without making a sound. Entire aisles shifted like pieces on a giant chessboard. The building wasn't standing still. It was rearranging itself. The child's voice spoke again. 5. A low sigh rolled through the darkness. Thousands of archive boxes clicked open at once. Not violently, gently, as though every lid had been lifted by careful hands. From inside them came breathing. Hundreds, then thousands. Each box contained something alive. Daniel wanted to run. He couldn't. His legs felt rooted to the floor. The older Daniel slowly uncovered the broken mirror and held it toward him. "Don't use your eyes. Use this." Daniel reluctantly looked into the cracked glass. At first, he saw only his own frightened reflection. Then the reflection shifted. The archive behind him appeared inside the mirror. But it was different. The shelves were gone. The darkness was gone. Instead, he saw a colossal circular room with walls stretching upward beyond sight. The archive boxes were not boxes at all. They were doors. Thousands upon thousands of tiny doors built into the walls. Behind each small door, a human face stared out through a narrow opening. Silent, motionless, watching. Some looked ancient. Some looked like children. Some were smiling. Some were crying. All of them were awake. Daniel nearly dropped the mirror. "What?" The older Daniel interrupted. "That's what the archive really is." His voice trembled. "It doesn't keep records. It keeps witnesses." Daniel's mouth went dry. Witnesses to what? The older man's expression collapsed into despair. "You'll see." A deep metallic bell rang somewhere above them. Once, twice, 3 times. Every face inside the tiny doors slowly turned in the same direction. Not toward the sound, toward Daniel. Thousands of eyes fixed on him simultaneously. Then every mouth opened together. No scream came out. Only one whispered sentence. "So." The pause felt endless. "You finally looked." The broken mirror cracked straight down the middle. And behind Daniel, something smiled. The mirror split cleanly in two. The sharp crack echoed through the vast chamber like a gunshot. Daniel's reflection broke apart. One half still showed his terrified face. The other no longer reflected him at all. Instead, it showed someone standing directly behind him. Tall, motionless, close enough that the edge of a dark coat almost touched his back. Daniel's blood turned to ice. He did not turn around. The older Daniel had warned him. "Don't let it see your face." The silence deepened. Then a slow, deliberate sound drifted through the archive. A single pair of hands, clapping. Once. A long pause. Then again. The applause was calm. Measured, almost appreciative, as though someone had just finished watching a performance. Daniel tightened his grip on the broken mirror. "What is it?" he whispered. The older Daniel closed his eyes. "I hoped you wouldn't survive long enough to meet it." Another clap. Closer this time. The invisible audience of thousands remained perfectly still behind. Their tiny doors. Not one blinked. Not one breathed. They were waiting. The older Daniel spoke without moving his lips. "It doesn't have one shape. It wears whatever the archive needs." The air became noticeably colder. Frost crept across the brass lamp, across the ledger. across the floor at Daniel's feet. Each icy pattern spread outward in perfect circles. Then, a shadow slid across the ground, not cast by anything, moving by itself. It flowed around Daniel's boots like black water. It circled him once, twice, then stopped. The applause ended. A voice spoke. Not loud, not threatening, gentle, cultured. The voice of someone who had spent a lifetime speaking softly in libraries. Mr. Mercer. Daniel's hands trembled. I've been expecting you. The voice came from directly behind him. Yet when he glanced into the broken mirror, no one stood there. Only empty darkness. You've already seen more than most. The voice sounded almost pleased, and unlike the others, a faint chuckle. You've asked the right questions. The older Daniel whispered. Don't answer. Daniel kept staring into the mirror. His own breathing fogged the cracked glass. Then another reflection slowly appeared beside his. A man dressed in an immaculate black suit. His silver hair was perfectly combed. His pale gloves looked spotless. His face was impossible to remember. Daniel could see every feature while looking at him. The moment his eyes shifted away, he forgot them completely. Only one detail remained. The smile. Polite, patient, timeless. The man inclined his head slightly. Allow me to introduce myself. He placed one gloved hand over his chest. I am the curator. He smiled a little wider. I preserve everything humanity insists on forgetting. As he spoke those words, every tiny door lining the endless walls slowly swung open. The people inside stepped out, one by one. Hundreds, then thousands. They were not ghosts, not monsters, just ordinary people. Teachers, doctors, children, construction workers, police officers, nurses, travelers, every era, every age, every face expressionless. They formed silent rows stretching farther than Daniel could see. No one looked at the curator. Every single one looked only at Daniel. The curator's voice became almost sympathetic. They've all been where you are now. He paused, and every one of them believed they could leave. Then he raised one white-gloved finger, and all at once, thousands of silent witnesses took a single synchronized step toward Daniel. Thousands of shoes struck the floor at exactly the same moment. The sound rolled through the archive like distant thunder. Then, silence. No one took a second step. The endless crowd simply stood there, watching Daniel with empty, exhausted eyes. Some were dressed in clothing from the 1940s. Others wore modern business suits. A few still wore hospital gowns. One little boy clutched a red toy truck against his chest. An elderly woman held a pair of knitting needles. A firefighter's helmet hung loosely from one man's hand. They looked like people whose ordinary lives had been interrupted in the middle of a single day and never allowed to continue. The curator folded his gloved hands behind his back. His smile never faded. Do you know the difference between a library and an archive? Daniel said nothing. The library lends. The curator began walking slowly through the motionless crowd. His polished shoes made no sound. The archive keeps. He stopped beside a young woman in a faded yellow raincoat. She never blinked, never acknowledged him. He gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face, almost like a father comforting a child. Every civilization buries things it cannot bear to remember. His voice was calm. Crimes, disappearances, experiments, promises, names. The word names lingered in the air. They believe forgetting destroys the truth. He smiled. They are mistaken. The curator looked directly into Daniel's eyes. The truth simply comes here. Daniel finally found his voice. What is this place? The curator's expression softened. This. He slowly spread his arms. This is memory after memory has been abandoned. Daniel frowned. I don't understand. You will. The older Daniel suddenly stepped between them. His tired face hardened. Stop talking to him. The curator sighed with genuine disappointment. You still think sacrifice changes the ending? It doesn't. The older Daniel ignored him. Instead, he turned to his younger self. Listen carefully. You've been asking the wrong question. Daniel stared. The wrong question. The older man nodded. You keep asking what this place is. A long pause. You should be asking. His voice dropped to a whisper. Why it suddenly opened. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. He had never considered that. The older Daniel continued. For decades, no one found level 7. No one entered. No one replaced me. His eyes filled with fear. Until tonight. The curator slowly closed his eyes, almost savoring the moment. Yes. A faint smile crossed his face. Because tonight, he opened his eyes again. Someone outside finally remembered us. The lights overhead flickered. For the first time since Daniel entered the archive, a deep mechanical vibration echoed through the walls. Not from inside the building, from somewhere above it. Heavy machinery. Steel grinding against concrete. The demolition crews. They had arrived. The entire archive shivered. Dust rained from the unseen ceiling. The curator looked upward. For the first time, his smile disappeared. And in a voice barely louder than a breath, he said, They're opening the roof. The entire archive lurched. A deep metallic groan rolled through the endless chamber, followed by the unmistakable sound of concrete cracking somewhere far above. For the first time since Daniel had entered level 7, the curator looked afraid. Only for a heartbeat. But Daniel saw it. The older Daniel saw it too. The roof, he whispered. They're tearing into the building. Another violent tremor shook the floor. Several shelves swayed. Gray archive boxes toppled from their places, spilling thousands of yellowed pages into the air. The papers did not fall. They floated, circling slowly like dead leaves caught in an invisible wind. The silent witnesses turned their heads upward in perfect unison. Every face wore the same expression. Hope. It was faint, fragile, but unmistakable. Daniel stared at them. They want this place destroyed. The older Daniel nodded. They've wanted it for decades. The curator's voice cut through the room. No. His calm tone had vanished. You misunderstand. He raised one gloved hand. Instantly, every floating page froze in midair. If the building falls, he looked directly at Daniel. The archive will not die. Another crack echoed overhead. Dust rained onto the polished floor. The curator continued. It will simply lose its anchor. Daniel frowned. Anchor. This building is only a doorway. His pale smile returned, though it no longer reached his eyes. The archive existed long before these walls were built. It existed before this city, before this nation. It has always needed one thing. He stepped closer. A witness. The older Daniel's shoulders slumped. As long as someone remembers this place, it survives. Daniel's stomach tightened. That's why you wanted me. The curator inclined his head. You walked through the door. You saw. You questioned. And now, his white-gloved fingers slowly rose toward Daniel's chest. You remember. A deafening crash exploded above them. For the first time, a shaft of brilliant daylight tore through the endless darkness. It punched through the unseen ceiling like a spear. Pure white light flooded the archive. The witnesses cried out not in pain, but in astonishment. Some reached trembling hands toward the light. Others fell to their knees. The little girl in the blue dress smiled for the first time. Then Daniel heard something impossible. Voices. Real voices. Not whispers. Not echoes. Workers shouting above. There's another floor down here. Get lights. There's someone inside. Daniel's heart leaped. They found us. He ran toward the beam of daylight. The older Daniel shouted after him. Wait. But Daniel was already sprinting through the falling papers. He reached the circle of light and looked up. Far above, silhouetted against the morning sky, stood several construction workers staring down through the broken roof. One of them pointed directly at Daniel. Another began lowering a rescue harness. Daniel laughed in disbelief. He was going to make it. He raised both arms and shouted, I'm here, please. I'm down here. The workers did not react. Not one of them waved back. Not one of them answered. Instead, they continued looking straight through him, as if he wasn't there. One worker removed his hard hat, crossed himself, and whispered to the man beside him. Daniel couldn't hear the words, but he could read his lips. There isn't anyone alive. Behind Daniel, the curator closed his eyes. I'm sorry, he said softly. They're not looking at you. A cold hand settled gently on Daniel's shoulder. The older Daniel's voice broke with grief. They're looking at me. Daniel's smile disappeared. Slowly, very slowly, he turned toward the older man. What did you say? The older Daniel looked up at the circle of daylight. For the first time in decades, tears filled his tired eyes. They finally found the body. Another worker leaned over the shattered roof. Daniel watched as a rescue light swept across the archive. Its bright beam passed directly through his chest. There was no warmth, no shadow, no reaction. The light continued until it stopped on the older Daniel. The workers began shouting excitedly. He's there. Lower another line. We've got one survivor. Daniel stared at his own hands. His fingers looked normal, solid, alive. Yet the rescue light had treated him like empty air. His breathing became uneven. No. The older Daniel nodded sadly. I remember saying that. He reached into his pocket and unfolded a brittle newspaper clipping. The date had almost faded away. August 15th, 1989. The headline read, Security Guard Survives Mysterious Building Collapse. Below the headline was a black and white photograph. A younger version of the older Daniel sat wrapped in a blanket beside an ambulance. His face was hollow. His eyes stared into nothing. The article described him as the sole survivor. Daniel looked up, but the older Daniel finished the sentence for him. I was never alone. A painful silence settled between them. The archive never needed keepers, the older man said quietly. It only needed one. Daniel felt the truth creeping toward him like ice spreading across glass. Then who am I? The curator answered. You are the memory. Daniel slowly shook his head. No. You entered this place. No. You witnessed it. No. You never truly left. The words struck Daniel harder than any scream. His mind exploded with fractured images. The lobby. The wet footprints. The impossible elevator. The scream. The black door. Then, another memory. One he had never lived. Or had he? He saw himself weeks earlier, reading old newspaper reports about the Ashcroft building. He saw himself becoming obsessed, returning night after night, searching for a floor that officially did not exist. Then, the memory changed. He saw himself standing inside level 7, completely alone. The curator offering him the registration ledger, a pen, a signature, his own trembling hand writing his name. Then absolute darkness. Daniel staggered backward. I signed. The curator inclined his head. You did. I don't remember. That is why the archive exists. The older Daniel looked at him with overwhelming pity. It doesn't steal memories. It replaces them. A loud mechanical groan shook the chamber. The rescue harness finally reached the older Daniel. One of the workers shouted, "We've got you." The older man smiled. His first genuine smile. I've waited 37 years to hear those words. Daniel reached for him. Take me with you. The older Daniel's smile faltered. I can't. Why? Because his voice cracked. They can only rescue the one who was forgotten. The curator quietly stepped between them. The rescue cable tightened. Above, the workers began pulling the older Daniel upward toward the daylight. As he slowly rose into the brilliant morning sky, he looked down one last time. Daniel. He swallowed hard. When you hear someone tell the story of Ashcroft, don't let them finish it. Daniel frowned in confusion. What? The older Daniel closed his eyes. Because every person who learns the ending becomes the next witness. The cable lifted him beyond the broken ceiling, into the light. Gone. The beam of daylight narrowed. The cracked roof above began sealing itself, stone grinding against stone as if time itself were reversing. The curator looked at Daniel, then smiled. No. He gently opened the enormous registration ledger to a fresh, empty page. Shall we begin your first day as archivist? The ledger lay open before Daniel. Its pages were impossibly white, untouched, waiting. The fountain pen rested across the empty line where his name had already been, written in elegant black ink. Daniel Mercer. Below it was a single title, Head Archivist. The curator picked up the pen. He did not force it into Daniel's hand. He simply held it out. You still have a choice. Daniel looked around. The witnesses stood silently in endless rows. The little girl in the blue dress held her worn rabbit close to her chest. For the first time, she looked directly at Daniel, not with fear, but with hope. The older Daniel was gone. The circle of daylight had vanished. The archive was whole again. Daniel understood. If he signed, the archive would continue exactly as it always had. If he refused, what then? He turned to the curator. You lied. The curator's expression remained calm. About what? You said the archive survives because someone remembers it. Yes, but that's not the whole truth. The curator said nothing. Daniel continued. It survives because someone believes it cannot end. A faint crack appeared across the curator's smile. Daniel looked at the endless witnesses. They aren't prisoners. They're unfinished memories. The little girl took a hesitant step forward. So, if no one keeps the story, the memories can finally rest. For the first time in countless years, uncertainty crossed the curator's face. Daniel smiled. A tired, frightened smile. You made one mistake. And what was that? You let me learn everything. Daniel took the registration ledger. The curator did not move. He only watched. Daniel carried the enormous book to the brass lamp on the desk. Its yellow flame burned steadily. The curator spoke for the first time with genuine urgency. Daniel, if you destroy the record, every forgotten truth disappears forever. Daniel looked at the thousands of silent faces. No, they disappear with it. He pushed the ledger into the flame. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the ink caught fire. Black letters curled into ash. The flames spread across every page at once. The archive shook violently. The shelves cracked. Thousands of gray boxes burst open. Not with monsters, with light. Warm golden light poured from every box, filling the endless chamber. The witnesses began fading. Not screaming, not crying, smiling. The little girl laughed softly as the stuffed rabbit became new again in her hands. An old man removed his hat. A nurse closed her eyes peacefully. One by one, they dissolved into drifting particles of light that floated upward like fireflies, disappearing into the morning sky. The curator stood perfectly still. His immaculate black suit slowly unraveled into ribbons of shadow. He looked neither angry nor afraid, only lonely. I kept them because no one else would. Daniel met his gaze. I know. The curator's smile returned one final time. Small, sad. Perhaps that was my punishment. The darkness collapsed inward. The endless shelves folded into nothing. The brass lamp went out. Everything vanished. 3 days later, firefighters searched the ruins of the Ashcroft Municipal Records building. They found broken concrete, twisted steel, waterlogged filing cabinets. Nothing more. No hidden 7th floor. No underground archive. No records explaining what had once existed beneath the building. Only one object was recovered. A scorched brass nameplate. The inscription had almost melted away. Investigators could read only 2 words: archivist. The artifact disappeared from evidence before anyone could photograph it. No report ever explained where it went. Years later, people told strange stories about the old Ashcroft site. Some claimed that, on rainy nights, they heard distant pages turning beneath the empty lot. Others insisted those sounds were only water moving through cracked pipes. No one could prove either story, but every version ended the same way. A quiet warning passed from one stranger to another. If you ever find a staircase that wasn't there yesterday, never climb it, because some doors do not lead to places. They lead to memories that have been waiting for someone new to remember them.